The Zionists are fighting. That's right, the Board of Deputies, a right-wing pro-Israel organisation, put out a statement yesterday condemning 36 members of the board. Following the publication of the letter by 36 deputies in the Financial Times last week that was not representative of the Board of Deputies' policy on Israel, the Board of Deputies today convened an extraordinary meeting of the Executive Committee to discuss the ramifications and consequences of this act. The Board of Deputies can now confirm, and we're going to read through a couple of them. Following multiple complaints by deputies and the public, all 36 signatories of the letter to the Financial Times are now subject to a complaints procedure in accordance with Appendix G to the Board of Deputies' Constitution. All members of the executive eligible to vote unanimously approved a motion temporarily suspending the vice chair of the International Division from that role and the executive while they remain subject to the complaints procedure, having signed the Financial Times letter and given further media interviews on it. Board of Deputies President Phil Rosenberg said, "We take alleged breaches of the Code of Conduct seriously. I am grateful to the Constitution Committee for the speed with which they have reviewed the initial complaints, and it is right that they are now given the time and space to review the cases with due process and impartiality. The Board of Deputies is clear. Only our democratically elected honorary officers and authorised staff speak on behalf of the organisation." Now, what was it that the 36 members did that was so bad that warranted a statement like this? The UK's Board of Deputies has suspended a senior member after she co-signed a letter criticising Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the war on Gaza. Harriet Goldenberg was one of 36 members of the UK's leading Jewish organisation who broke ranks to condemn Israel's actions over the past year and a half. Published in the Financial Times last week, the letter was the first public show of opposition to Israel's war on Gaza from within the BOD. Signatories urged the board, which has more than 300 elected deputies, to release a statement criticising the renewed offensive in Gaza last month, but the organisation has not done so. In the letter, dissenting members had written, "The inclination to avert our eyes is strong, as what is happening is unbearable, but our Jewish values compel us to stand up and to speak out." That's right, 36 members mildly criticised Israel in their onslaught of Palestinians. Noffel, we're getting to the point that even Zionists are reprimanded for the smallest critique of Israel. This is getting insane, isn't it?
No, it totally is. It totally is. Pushing aside the problematic nature of conflating Judaism with Zionism and having to act as an organization as if anyone that is critical of a genocide going on and military action, apartheid, and illegal occupation is somehow attacking Jewish people and their faith is inherently anti-Semitic, I would argue. But even when one puts that aside, if 36 members have had to come out and say, "We don't feel like this represents us," and your reaction to that is to do an internal investigation, to me that shows that there is nothing of value to be said in that organization in the first place. Because if you are going to critically suppress Jewish people for their opinions, looking at them as if it's some sort of dissent, then I would argue that it's nothing more than a mouthpiece for Israel and not a actual serious organization that cares about putting forward Jewish people on the line and their thoughts and opinions.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I find it so ridiculous that they are a board of deputies of Jews, right? But they don't represent all Jewish people, and that is a perfect example of it. And this is where Zionist organizations, this is how they operate all of the time. Look inside the Labour Party. What happened when you had Jewish voices on the left or Jewish voices who were against the Netanyahu or the Israeli government? Look what happened. They were suspended. They were expelled. You know, the Middle East Eye even published an article saying you're more likely to be suspended if you're Jewish. And in my opinion, that kind of makes the Labour Party institutionally anti-Semitic, right? And that's what the Board of Deputies is doing. And you're absolutely right. I think that Zionism is a far-right fascist political ideology. I also think it's anti-Semitic because you are conflating Jewish people with Israel. The fact that the BOD has not once criticized Israel in a year and a half, I'm actually surprised about that. I know they were a Zionist organization, but I thought maybe since the 7th of October, they might have said something. They haven't. And then what? A small little mild critique of Netanyahu. By the way, they didn't say anything about Zionism. They didn't say anything about Israel. They said Netanyahu, and yet they're reprimanded for it. So what does that say then? That it's not even about criticizing the Israeli state. It's just who is the leader of it, which, by the way, a lot of Zionists criticize Netanyahu, and that's their sort of defense by saying, we don't support war crimes. We don't uncritically support Israel, but then it's kind of an easy escape to say we attack Netanyahu without attacking the state itself in the 75-year occupation. So they're not even attacking Zionism, but they're just attacking the leader. What does that say?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with how much of a vassal state for foreign policy the UK is for the
Yeah.
US. And for the audience members that don't know what that means, a vassal state is essentially a sovereign country that does act within its own interests. But in terms of foreign policy, the UK has always followed suit wherever America will go, whether we saw with Tony Blair or whether we saw with the war on terror or anything after World War II. If America says jump, we says how high. But in terms of the landscape of political Zionism, I love the fact you brought up the Corbyn years as well, because there is something intrinsically terrifying about going onto the media and telling every single Jewish viewer there that they feel unsafe because there are people out on the streets, including other Jewish people, critiquing the murder and slaughter of 15,000 children. That sort of political landscape is very, very, very dangerous. And telling Jewish people that they should be afraid of that creates a very fertile soil, I would argue, for the radical sort of Zionism that we see, which is what you were alluding to. Like, how have we got here? Why is it that even liberal Zionism is critiqued so harshly within the Board of Deputies?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that sort of that atmosphere of fear for Jewish people, because that's what Zionism does. Because again, look, if you look at the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, they've expanded their definition of anti-Semitism to include criticisms of Israel. Now, I was reading an article, or just the headline from the New York Post. Okay, it's a right-wing publication, and they were claiming that on average, Jewish people face 25 anti-Semitic attacks per day. And I'm thinking, well, that seems like quite high. And then within that headline, it says, most often it's linked to criticisms of Israel. And what you're having there, and this is not downplaying anti-Semitism. We've said it so many times that it's a serious issue. But also, facts are facts, right? If you're including the definition of anti-Semitism, which is just criticizing Israel, one, obviously, you're smearing people as anti-Semitic, which is what we've seen for years now. It's a decades-long thing, clearly bubbled up to its highest point in the Corbyn years. But it also creates a culture of fear because it tells Jewish people that there is so much anti-Semitism around here that you should be fearful for your life. Now, for me, I think that is done on purpose. I think that's a recruitment tool to try and bring more people to Israel. The more people that go to Israel, the more likely they can expand and colonize certain areas. I think that's part of the tool. I don't know if you agree with that or not, though.
I think it's a very interesting point. It's one I haven't thought about, but in the scheme of things, it makes sense. Last thing I want to say on this is something that you said, which was the critique of Israel always comes back to leadership and never as a state. And I think not acknowledging the asymmetry that lies in a settler colonial ethno-state, which is determined on expansion into territories deemed illegal. And that's not just Palestine, that's also Syria, we see with Golan Heights, for example, or any idea for greater Israel. I think it really bastardizes the reality on the ground that's happening to the Palestinians. And I think it represents I think it's terrible, in fact, that Israel does try to whitewash its crimes, even in liberal ways, with things like liberal Zionism, something that historically has still believed in supremacy over Arabs or Palestinians. And I think we cannot really talk about the critique of Israel or Israeli foreign policy, whether that be Netanyahu or, former ministers like Yoav Galan or, far-right coalition leaders like Ben Gvir. I don't think we can talk about it without talking about the history of a decades-long occupation.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.